Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I am your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very accomplished professional from Washington, D.C., USA, Wendie Veloz. Wendie, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Wendie is a social impact strategist. She's the founder of Wendie Veloz Enterprises, and she has a background in government funding, nonprofit management, and social entrepreneurship. So, Wendie, before we start talking about some of the work that you are doing, tell me a little bit about your own amazing journey.
Yeah, well, I grew up in Los Angeles, so on the other side of the United States, and I decided to go to graduate school for social work. And I knew that I wanted to make a difference in the world. I wanted to change policies, change conditions for people who are living in poverty. And so I went to the US government and I worked there for about 13 years.
Wow.
And then I decided to change a little bit and explore entrepreneurship. And so I've worked in the government for a long time, worked in nonprofit sector, but I liked the idea of being able to choose who I could help and choose how I can help, and to be able to explore entrepreneurship. It offers me those two freedoms as well as the freedom of time. So I've been for the last 2 years working on my own business and helping others in the way that I want to.
Oh, wonderful. And, when I was reading about you, it was interesting to read that you use your skills as a Reiki and sound healer to help social entrepreneurs break mindset barriers and change the world. Help me understand this and do give me an example.
Sure, absolutely. So I am an advanced Reiki practitioner. So that means I'm an energy healer. A lot of people in India probably understand this, but others may not know. And I think that the idea of adding this to entrepreneurship coaching, it really helps unlock some people's potential to how they use their energy, how they harness their energy, and how they use their mindset to start transforming their lives.
Right.
And a lot of the time, meditation is not a practice that people can easily engage in, particularly when they have a lot of running thoughts or they have negative narratives that they've inherited over the course of their life. And that mindset work and the energy healing and sound healing, all of that can help break those harmful narratives and help you change your mindset, maybe from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset, or even just having the confidence to pursue your own passion, to do your own work in the way that you've been called. So that's the reason why I blend them together. And I think the example is I've actually done business coaching sessions where the last 20 to 30 minutes is a Reiki session. So although we've been talking about business for the whole time, talking about what people are going through, then we end up really harnessing their own energy and potential to be able to unlock that for the people they serve.
Well said. And I don't know much about Reiki, but I do know that it's a very, very powerful healing tool. And I know a lot of people who practice it. So thank you for sharing your own experience.
Yeah.
So Wendie, you're also a social impact strategist. How do you define a social impact strategist?
Yeah, when I first started calling myself that, I thought it was a term that I made up, right? Like you don't hear about many people who are social impact strategists. And then I found a whole group of them. And it turns out that there's a good number of us who have worked in the social sector before and understand what it takes to scale programs, to sustain good work, and to really invest with a purpose. And of those people, I found, a really great group of friends besides me who've all done amazing work around the world. A lot of them in the UK with charities. A lot of them have done international work. Some have been here in the United States. And so when we say social impact strategist, I think it really just means someone who has done the work in the trenches, who understands the policies and the programs and the types of things that we have to create in order to move social change agendas forward. And when you're doing that work, it's helpful to have a guide or a coach or a resource who's experienced with this work, who can shortcut some things for you. So that's really what a social impact strategist does, is you really help people take the lessons we learned.
Absolutely, I agree. Thank you. And are there any specific areas of social impact that you work in?
Yeah, I prefer working with communities of color. So people who have experienced harmful systemic racism, poverty, as I mentioned, injustices, inequities. Those are the populations I prefer to work with. A lot of them have had a limited number of resources coming to communities, or have had lack of opportunity in communities. And so those are the types of things that I prefer to work on. That means that I sometimes work on issues in Africa with entrepreneurs in Africa.
Yeah.
I also work just as closely with entrepreneurs here in inner cities in the United States. So it just depends, but that's really the bulk of the work that I do.
And, when you talk about the work that you're doing, are there any common issues people face that you're addressing through these impact groups or networks?
Yeah, a lot of people, for some reason, homelessness is a very common thing that people want to address. Homelessness, veterans issues, like I said, related to poverty or criminal justice involvement, for example. These are topics that a lot of people have had interactions with in their life, and they see the value in changing these systems or changing these things for other people. So a lot of the time, the people that I work with are really passionate about it because they've had some sort of lived experience, either themselves or someone they love or someone they've just met, and it's transformed their thinking around this topic, and so much so that they want to dedicate a portion of their life to changing it.
Very interesting. My other question to you, and I've asked this from many people I've spoken to who work in the area of social impact, is about culture. How does culture impact social impact projects?
Yeah, I think that it has a lot to do with it, because how you approach something has to be tailored for where you're working, the culture you're working in, and the people who you're working with. And a lot of the times we may think, well, we can take this one thing and rubber stamp it over here and get the same impact. And that's not always the case, because things need to be adapted for the situation and the culture that you're working in. So it's not always the best practice to just expect things to yield the same results. And you really do have to alter. So that's one way. But then I also think, as a social entrepreneur, our culture, what we bring to the work, is important. Our understanding and lens of how the world operates is really important to creating change. And so I'm of the Latino culture, which means, I'm of Mexican heritage, but born in the United States. I've experienced things in my lifetime that are very specific to the Latino experience in the US, maybe not in other countries, but definitely here. And I bring a lot of that lens to my work. So I think there's multiple levels of culture playing into how we make an impact, and how we as individuals want to create impact through the lens that we operate in.
Also, I think different cultures, different countries understand social impact very differently. And I've often said that in the US, the US citizens are probably the biggest givers that I have seen anywhere. I mean, the amount of money they give away is very substantial. How do social impact projects get funded in countries which are developing themselves?
Oh, this is an excellent question. So I didn't mention that I spent a good number of years working on issues in Africa, which is why I always mention it, because I used to live in Uganda, I lived in Tanzania, and I worked on impact-based projects. And I think the funding really has to come from, in a lot of places, taking away money that had traditionally been locked up in corruption. And this is maybe a little bit of a controversial statement, but hear me out. I've seen corruption firsthand, and I understand, especially when I was conducting a needs assessment in Uganda for the district schools, for example, schools were operating for 2 months, but they hadn't yet received their money from the government to operate, right? Which meant teachers weren't getting paid. They didn't have the supplies they needed. So if we're able to do things like freeing up that money that maybe wasn't accessible to people in the past, and then dedicating that to development or to international assistance, or taking away from international assistance and dedicating the home country's funds, that definitely needs to happen, right? And I don't think enough people raise awareness of this issue, because you always get weary talking about corruption, especially if you've seen it and you've lived in countries where it exists, right? And it exists everywhere, not to say it doesn't exist here in the United States, but I think that in other countries, you'll even see signs that say, anti-corruption signs, right? So people are really aware that it's happening, but yet it still persists as a practice.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're right. And the corruption is something which is intrinsic as a part of so many of the developing countries, and I'm so glad you pointed that out. My next question to you, Wendie, is on the pandemic. And I know that the pandemic has impacted a lot of social impact projects because they're so dependent on different kinds of inputs that you get, including funding. What is your perspective on how did it take its toll on the social impact leaders?
Yeah, so I worked in public health during the pandemic. That was actually my role. I was the policy director of a health department in the United States in a small city, or a big city, actually. Mm-hmm. And it's, I think as a leader, what I saw was the immense amount of burnout that was allowed to happen, but without there was no support, no recourse, there was no action to support the workers. And I think that, even though I saw it in public health, it was probably experienced throughout the helping professions, no matter what part of, helping you do. A lot of people probably experienced an intense amount of burnout, having to adjust how they worked or how they connected with their populations, or what kinds of policies, or like you said, inputs and information were coming through. All of that caused an immense amount of stress. And I have yet to see any mass healing for the helpers to get past some of the things that the pandemic might have created, either in their own, body as they kind of embody the stress, but also in their own brain as they're having to constantly work and the conditions got worse, or the conditions got more difficult to operate. So I think that there needs to be, pretty substantial effort to go back and try to help the people who for the last couple of years have probably been on overdrive.
Fascinating. One more question relating to social impact, and then we'll move to coaching. Most businesses, organizations are being impacted by the technology that we are seeing, in virtually every industry. I'd love to get your perspective on how is technology changing social impact projects?
Well, for the first time, I'm seeing people say questions like, how can I use artificial intelligence to support the operations of my organization? Wow. And I think these are great questions, but we also have to take it with a grain of salt that not all of your experience as a human or as an organization can go into an artificial intelligence platform and come out with something that is going to really tell your story accurately. So I think for things like grant writing, strategic planning, fundraising, all of these very core impact organization functions, this is going to be a great tool, but you have to train your staff and your workers, if you're going to use it in the way that's going to best benefit the organization and not harm it. And I can already foresee people using it for grant funding, but I used to be a grant reviewer. So I can tell you for certain, if I had 5 applications written by artificial intelligence in front of me, I would be able to tell, right? I would know. And so just having the ability to discern, how much should you lean on technology to support you, and how much do you still need to put in raw effort in order to get the outcome you want.
Correct. And what about using technology to be able to deliver what the project wants to deliver to the masses?
I love that, because I think that now with mobile technology, I've even seen a substantial growth in Africa, what's available in very, very rural places, right? So when you're talking about very rural development in countries that are difficult to navigate, if we have the cellular infrastructure there, we can deliver programming virtually, we can deliver resources, we can get requests for resources. And I really think that leaning into the technology for those purposes is really important, because sometimes people don't have access to a full computer, but they may have access to a mobile phone. So figuring out how are we going to scale programming in a virtual space, now that people are a little bit more used to doing things virtually, how can we take advantage of that culture shift?
Very interesting. Let me now move to coaching. After a background in the government, working with so many social sector organizations, what made you become a coach?
Well, I realized when I went out on my own that I had been coaching the whole time. I had always been working as a government project officer, supporting organizations and individual people through their journey. And it would always include the same things, asking them questions, giving them resources, helping them unlock different ideas that they had, and then helping them through the implementation of those ideas. And when I realized it, I was like, that was what a coach does. You can be a consultant and you can come in and you can do it for the organization, but I much prefer building capacity in a sustainable way, which means teaching people the skills they need to go forward. And so I blended my love of teaching and training with the idea of supporting individual social entrepreneurs and small organizations in their first 5 years of founding. So primarily my coaching practices are focused on that group who's really, really early on and needs a lot of support.
Amazing. And given again your amazing background, which is so diverse and so rich, how has your own background supported your coaching philosophy, your style, and your values?
I've always been a kind of transformational leader. I've always wanted people to understand that leadership can be supportive. Leadership can include, a lot of skills and resources, but also my own experience was that I didn't always have the best leaders, right? And so what I've tried to bring into my practice and into my own company is the opposite, quite frankly, of what I've seen in the past, particularly in the government sector, where it's not always the best leadership. And so I try to use my personal experience as much as possible to tell me what to do and what not to do. And I think that that's really important, that we all have to be reflective of what's happened in the past and how can we take the best parts of what we've learned and also leave the things that weren't the best in the past, but grow, right? Still continue to grow from them. And so that's one of the things I bring to the experience that I have with the people who go through my coaching, is explaining to them why something makes sense as from a leadership perspective, right? And really helping them understand how to use that to support their sustainability.
Fascinating. And my next question relates to a lot of people who influence each one of us in our lives. My question to you is, how have the people who have influenced you impacted you as a coach?
Yeah, I mean, I've had several coaches and each of them has had their own impact, but I think in the past, it's really been about the mentors that I had growing up, right? Knowing that I could do whatever I wanted to do, or that I'd have the confidence to step out and, be a content creator and have my own business and all of these other things that didn't come from coaches in the recent past. That came from mentors when I was a child, right? Really people who poured into me over the course of my career and have taught me how to network, have taught me how to stand up in a room and speak in public, who've taught me how to handshake firmly, all of these very, very basic core things that I now do daily with ease, without a hesitation, organizing events, bringing people together. All of these skills are things that my mentors taught me from college forward. And so I'm very fortunate to have had some amazing mentors in my lifetime who have contributed a lot of really tangible skills for me to move forward in my journey.
Very interesting. So we've got time for 2 more questions for you. My next question is about the young leaders. And I'm from the boomers generation, but I've often seen the young millennials and the young Gen Z leaders who are now coming into leadership roles in different organizations. They're bringing a breath of fresh air into every organization that they come in. They've got new perspectives. My question to you is, what are the areas these young leaders need to be coached in?
It's an excellent question. I actually operate from the perspective of we should always be grooming the next generation to take over for us, right?
Yeah.
So when you're talking about coaching and what skills should they be learning, I mean, I think it's all of the things that we learned in our journey need to be packaged and passed on, right? And so we need to find the vehicles to do that, whether it's, hardcore finance information about how do we do this impact work from a financial perspective, all the way to the social justice and social, rights movement, and how do you learn from the prior movements in the past to keep moving social justice forward. And I think that, we all in our older generation, I'd say I'm also in that Zennial, it's kind of like millennial and Gen Z mixed together. So I consider myself the older generation now, but as I think about my work, I always have to tell myself, what is it that I need to pass on to this next generation? And how can I start packaging it in a way for them to receive the knowledge and the wisdom? And I think, it's the what is not, it's boundless. We should be teaching everything, right? But I think it's more, how do these older generations do it in a way that's really going to invite the innovation from that the younger generations bring, because they have such a fresh perspective. Like you said, they're moving things forward much faster than we did. So how do we teach, but then also open the doors for them to take over and change and be okay with them leading in a different direction?
Fascinating. And my last question to you, Wendie, and this is for the many, many people who will listen to our conversation. Based on your own incredible experience, what would you say are 3 lessons you would want our viewers and listeners to take away from our conversation and your journey?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of lessons that I've had to learn. One, for you to just keep going, you have to believe in yourself. And it doesn't matter what other people are going to say or how many roadblocks you're going to come into. You have to believe in yourself and believe that you're here for this specific purpose if you're going to create true social change. And 2, what we're trying to do is work ourselves out of a job. I said this a little bit earlier, but I'm going to say it again. It's an important lesson for me. We want to be able to make things sustainable, to have a legacy without us. And if we're not there, that legacy will move on, or the problems we're trying to solve will become better, right? So we'll have achieved our objectives. So always thinking about and focusing, how can I work myself out of a job, is the second one. And then the third one, I think it's just really personal, is always putting your own wellness first, understanding that as a social entrepreneur, you probably give and serve a lot and give a lot to other people naturally, because it provides joy to your life. You feel fulfilled, all these different things, but you have to give back to yourself in order to keep giving to others. So always finding a way to balance your own life and your own well-being so that you can harness your energy and you can make a true difference and you can serve others in the way that you want.
Well said. And on that note, Wendie, and your 3 amazing lessons: believe in yourself to keep going. Second is work yourselves out of a job. And as you were telling me this, I went back 4 decades when someone very senior in my company told me that the faster you make yourself redundant, the faster you will grow. And you get a bigger job, So thank you for reminding me that all over again. And the third one, of course, is so important. Your own wellness comes first. Thank you so much for speaking to me, Wendie, about your own journey, about Reiki. Again, it was wonderful to hear about Reiki from you. Thank you for speaking to me about all the amazing work that you seem to be doing in the area of social impact. And finally, thank you for speaking to me about all the work you're doing as a coach. Thank you again, and good luck.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's been great.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website, www.tbcy.in, to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.